Hi, today we're going to talk about what to do during a drought. Currently in Southern California, we have come out of the extreme drought category, and we are at a little lesser drought. However, by the summer, I would imagine that the drought will be back, and pretty much California is always in some sort of drought situation. So what we will talk about is trees initially, and what their importance is, what their benefits are, and then non-tree plants. The next topic would be what else can you do during a drought without having to start over? And then we'll run through some examples of drought-tolerant plants. So trees are a very precious resource. They have many benefits, and if we lose trees, it takes us a very long time to replace them. So this is why we want to protect them. And if we are limited, as many of our municipalities limit our water usage during a drought, we have to decide which things we're going to water first. So we'd like to emphasize that trees should be your first priority. They should be top of the list of the hierarchy. So let's look at the benefits of trees. First of all, they provide shade, which in turn cools urban heat islands. I'll explain that in a minute. Which in turn, if there's less heat, there's less use of air conditioning, which saves energy. Trees also clean the air and release oxygen, as well as absorbing carbon dioxide. They provide windbreaks, and they also capture runoff and storm water, serving as underground reservoirs for water. Trees beautify neighborhoods, which increase your property values. Many studies have been done about trees and nature in general, how that improves mental and emotional health. Trees reduce glare and reflections, noise, and they also provide habitats for animals and beneficial microorganisms. Now back to the urban heat island. This slide shows you that if we were in Palm Springs and the air temperature was 112 degrees, if we measured the asphalt temperature, as the thermometer shows in this screen, it would register 168 degrees. However, if that asphalt was in the shade, it would then register 95 degrees. So you can see that having shade can make a significant difference in the heat that one is feeling in that area. So how should we care for our trees? Again, it's important to water your trees based on the season of the year, as well as the tree species. A fruit tree is going to need a lot more water to stay alive than, say, a drought-tolerant tree like a Bubba willow or a Palo Verde. The rule of irrigation is always to irrigate deeply and infrequently. So irrigation should allow the water to reach just below the root zone. So in most trees, that could be almost 3 feet, depending on the age of the tree. And you would like to irrigate at the drip line, which is the end of where the canopy is. And if you have your trees in your lawn, it's recommended that you water them separately. So again, trees should take the priority, because once you lose a tree, it will take years to replace them. You can water them a variety of ways. 2 ways that we talk about are the garden hose, which can be very efficient if you water around the tree in 4 quadrants, and or a soaker hose. I use the soaker hose, and I set it up around the drip line and attach it and maybe water for 12 hours once a week. And that seems to do very well. If you, we do recommend that if you use soaker hoses, you don't use any that are longer than 50 feet, because the pressure between the beginning and the end will not be the same. So 50 foot, 25 or 50 feet soaker hoses is what we recommend. If you remove your lawn, remember that the trees will now need their own water since you're no longer watering with sprinkler irrigation. And those trees that have been in a lawn will have a shallow root system, and it will take them a long time to develop a deeper root system. Now let's get more specific with fruit and nut trees. Now, fruit and nut trees can be kept alive during a drought with 1 or 2 waterings. And however, the less you water them, you may keep them alive, but you'll have less crop. So if you want to produce a normal crop, you will need to give them adequate water from bloom until harvest. If you reduce the water to once a month or twice a month, you'll keep your tree alive, but you may not get the fruit that year. However, they will stay alive and you may be able to get fruit the next year. Stone fruits, in particular, peaches, plums, and nectarines, they will also reduce their output if the water is insufficient, but you can reduce the watering to starting 4 to 6 weeks before harvest, give them water to harvest, and then after that, you can reduce the water that they require. Citrus trees, unfortunately, in a drought, need to have adequate water throughout the summer and the fall in order to produce the normal crop in the winter. So if you're unable to water them adequately, you can water them enough to keep them alive and be hopeful that the following year there would be enough water left or to be able to get a crop. The next thing to be watching for with trees is your drought stress. There can be real drought and physiological drought. Drought stress will show up as wilting and drooping leaves that don't return to normal by evening. You may have yellow, browning, or gray leaves, and the new foliage will be stunted. Physiological drought would be when your tree wilts during the heat of the day, but then when you look at it in the evening, the leaves have popped back up. This is due to the tree having enough water, but the water can't rise the water from the roots to the leaves at the same rate that it's evaporating. So it's important not to overwater these trees at that time because you can have root rot even during a drought. So next, let's move to vegetables. And again, this is in a watering hierarchy. If you're limited in water, trees first, your vegetables next, because vegetables don't really tolerate drought. And we do want people to continue to earn food, to grow food. So they would be the next category of plants to allot your water to. In general, it's most critical to water them during the first few weeks of development and after transplanting and during flowering and fruit production. Now, vegetables such as tomatoes, beans, and other root crops like carrots do not really tolerate long dry periods. Vine crops such as squash, like zucchini, they can fare much better and be kept alive with just a once or twice a week watering. Shrubs are they're woody plants under 10 feet tall, and some of them are drought resistant, and they're mostly drought resistant if they're established for long periods of, if they've already been established, then they can survive for long periods of time. Again, you can water them maybe once or twice a month in spring and summer, water it for a long time, and you will keep them alive. They may not look the best, but they will stay alive. Ground covers, wow, this is a beautiful picture. Ground covers, they can often survive on about half the amount of water that they would prefer. So again, they might not look their best, but they will live. And if you've noticed, they're along the park freeways and in medians, you'll see a lot of ground covers, such as certain kinds of ice plant that do very well because those areas are not watered heavily. And last but not least would be our lawns. So lawns, grass, there's two kinds of grass. One is warm season grass, the other is cool season. Now, warm season grass are things like Bermuda grass, St. Augustine, and they're very drought tolerant. They will turn yellow straw-like in the winter. And I have St. Augustine, and when in the winter, I just turn the water off. And then once it starts to get warmer, I put the water on either 2 or 3 times a week, and it greens right up. If you have the other kind of grass, which is usually what homeowners associations plant, you're usually seeing it, marathon grass, fescues. Those things are cool season grasses, and they require up to 30% more water than the warm season grasses. There is a reference on the bottom of this slide that to a publication that you can get regarding the grasses at this UCANR website. So if you don't want to redo everything in your yard, what can you do to help your plants during a drought? The first thing would be mulch. You want to mulch around your plants, around your trees. You will want to apply 3 to 4 inches. Mulch prevents evaporation. It helps to hold the water in, and it also prevents weed growth. Weeds will compete with your desired plants for whatever water there is. So if we're talking about mulching trees, we recommend that you use, if it's organic mulch, you want to use 3 to 4 inches deep, and you want to have it go about 3 feet out from the trunk. However, it should not be against the trunk. If you can make a little donut around the trunk to keep the mulch off of it. You can use other mulches such as pebbles, rocks, or decomposed granite, and it would not need to be quite as deep as 3 to 4 inches. This is a diagram, well, slide showing 3 different wrong ways to mulch. The first, you'll see the mulch is in a cone against the trunk. This is actually covering up, looks like 3 to 4 inches of the trunk, which is very unhealthy for the tree. The next one, while it's not coned, it is touching the trunk, and it's also too small at the base of the tree. The third picture shows that the mulch is the correct circumference around the tree trunk, but it is still touching the tree trunk. And then another thing to keep in mind is that dyed black mulch will actually get hotter than asphalt in the sun and will work like an urban heat island. This next slide shows you that if you had a 108-degree summer day, black mulch would actually register at 165 degrees. Synthetic grass would register at 162 and black asphalt at 160. Living grass, it's a little hard to see, but I believe it says about 100. And if you notice, your dogs and cats do not like to lay on anything but that living grass because it's nice and cooling. So if you're thinking you want to get rid of your living grass because it's not drought tolerant and you wanted to switch to synthetic grass, you need to consider the fact that that might not be the solution to the problem here because you're going to be generating more heat. The next thing we can all do is check our sprinkler systems. We often have a lot of automated sprinkler systems that go off when we're not out in the yard. We should be checking them regularly to make sure that there's no leaks, no broken sprinklers, and that all of the area being watered is being watered uniformly. We should avoid fertilizing because the use of nitrogen increases the need of the plants for more water. In the hot months, you want to avoid, or drought, you want to avoid planting new plants because all new plants require frequent watering, if not daily, in the summer, sometimes twice a day. So while it's hard for most of us gardeners to avoid nurseries and garden centers in the summer and not want to buy plants, we all do, but I'm trying to stick to a moratorium on new plants between June and October. The next slide. This is a graph of the evaporation transpiration rate of a lawn. So that evaporation transpiration rate is the rate at which the water is evaporated. And you can see that throughout the year, the lawn is going to require a different amount of water based on how fast the evaporation is. So if you water the plants when they need it and cut back when they don't, you'll also be saving water. So you can see that during the winter, November, December, January, February, even into March, you may not need to water it more than once a week if it's a lawn. Plants, that this is just an example of a lawn. And then obviously in the summer, it's going to require more water. Another thing to consider when you're watering is your soil type. We have three kinds of soil in this diagram. One is silty, which is a sandy soil. That will allow water to percolate very quickly through it. It may even go past the plant's roots, and it will require more frequent watering. The sandy loam is your ideal type of soil because it has the best water holding capacity. The clay loam, which is what I have, is very hard soil and will only allow the water to penetrate in the first 1 to 2 inches. So for that area, you're going to have to water longer in order for the water to penetrate deep enough to get to the roots. If you want to know what the dryness of your soil is, when to water next, you can test your soil by picking it up and squeezing it in your hand. So you'll see the first one is dry, and that was sand. That's sandy soil. That's soil that crumbles. Medium is perfect, and wet, you're going to ooze some water from it. I personally, I know a lot of experts don't like water meters, but I personally have started using a water meter in my potted plants in the house because house plants are often overwatered and killed by that. And I've even started to use it in my garden and my potted plants outside to tell if they really need the water or they could go a couple more days without. Now, another thing we can consider when we're trying to save water is, can we collect it and can we utilize gray water? Collecting water is a whole separate topic of its own, as is gray water. Rainwater collection can be done, and there are ways, which I'm not knowledgeable about, to keep that water viable and clean that you can use it on your plants. Having permeable surfaces. If you need to hardscape, you want to use paving stones versus solid concrete. The last pictures of infiltration basins. These are depressions that you dig into your soil so that when water is running off, they'll run into this trough, if you will, and you can often plant plants right in there. This slide talks about setting up a gray water system from your laundry wastewater. So this is utilized for laundry loads that don't have chemicals in it. And again, this is a big topic all on its own, and I have the resource of a publication that can tell you much more about it at the bottom of the slide. Many cities don't require a permit to set it up, and this is just a sketch diagram that is out of focus because you really need to know more than this diagram could explain. But this wastewater cannot be used on anything edible, so it could only be, you can't use it on your fruit trees or your vegetables. And then there's a few other suggestions that we have for being water wise. One of them is to use a broom instead of a hose after gardening or cleaning your sidewalk. And the next would be to dig in compost into your soil. If you have sandy or clay soil, compost is going to increase the ability of the soil to hold water. It's also important to plant plants that are recommended for your sunset zone. Most plants, if you're ordering plants online, they will usually tell you which USDA zones that those plants will grow in. USDA zones are much larger than the sunset zones, and that information is based on the lowest temperature that the plant will tolerate. So USDA zones are good to use if you're living in any of the mountain areas. However, if you're living in the other areas in San Bernardino, you want to use your sunset zones. These are the sunset zones for the communities in San Bernardino, and they can also be found at the Sunset Western Garden Book and the UCANR website. Again, if I'm ordering something from a catalog and I see that it's USDA Zone 9, which I'm in, I then further look it up to see if in fact it will thrive in our area based on the sunset zone. But in nurseries and big box stores, I haven't seen that any of those plant tags have zones on them, one or the other. These are the zones that are usually used in our local mountains, 7A, 7B, and 8A. And now let me give you a few examples of some drought tolerant plants that we can use in our yards. And you may have seen in all there, I'm sure you've seen them all. One of them is blue fescue. It's a really nice little mounding grassy plant that has a blue foliage year round. And it's drought resistant and, as I said, grows in a mound, and you've seen it probably on roadside landscaping. Then there's the Muhlenbergia family. This particular plant in the picture shows that this one has cream colored flowers, and just recently, maybe a couple of months ago, you would have seen these grassy plants with these beautiful feathery pink flowers, and that's pink Muhlenbergia. Then the Monterey carpet Manzanita. Again, this is more like a ground cover. It grows low and wide. Then there's the penstemons. Many of the penstemons are drought tolerant, and they're very attractive to hummingbirds and butterflies and wildlife. Then there's clarity blue Dianella. I have some of this, and it's really turning out to be a nice plant. It takes full sun and it's drought tolerant. And what's not on this slide is that it also has little flowers. Right now the stalks are coming up, and they're very delicate, and the flowers will open up to be little small blue flowers. And then we've all seen the red yucca. It's everywhere. But there are also other kinds of yucca. There are pink ones, which I personally have not seen, but I have seen that in this area, we do have yellow yucca. Some of the nurseries do carry that. Another plant we see frequently in our area are the Tecomas. Sometimes they are this color, the orange color, and sometimes they are this yellowish color. And these are a pretty large plant. If you look at it, it's 6 to 8 feet high and wide. But again, drought tolerant, and hummingbirds really like it. This is an agave, and all agaves are drought tolerant, and they are also very prickly. So be careful when you plant them as far as mobility around them. They also need a lot of trimming care, which my husband personally does not like, so we don't have any agaves. Then this is the rock rose. Rock rose comes in white and pink. This pictures of the white roses. I've noticed in Redlands in their medians that they have a lot of the pink roses, and they're very pretty when they're in bloom. And when they're not in bloom, they're just kind of a innocuous green shrub that you wouldn't really know what it is, but they're really pretty when they're in bloom, and they're drought tolerant and live from year to year. And we know that the parkway mediums, the street mediums, they're not getting the most water because that's where the cities are monitoring their water usage. Rosemary comes in a variety. It can either be a ground cover. There's one that grows low. There are a couple of bush types. They all have blue or purple flowers. They're wonderful for bees. Bees really love them, and they tolerate drought very well. Also, gophers do not like rosemary. The salvias are also another family of plants, flowering plants that tolerate drought. This one is called Little Kiss, and its flowers are red and white, and it's beautiful. And I would say maybe grows 2 to 3 feet high, and it can spread quite a bit depending on how much you're watering it. I have this one as well, the Black and Bloom, and this is beautiful. The flowers are this very deep blue that almost goes into black. And again, it's drought tolerant, grows about 3 feet tall. It's not as full as the salvia, the Little Kiss salvia that I just showed you. This is another salvia. This one has purple flowers. And again, it attracts pollinators, and it can be used as a landscape or a container plant. And there are many more. This last one I have is of the Fremontodendron, California Glory. This is a large, would not be a shrub. This is a small tree because it grows 15 to 20 feet wide and high. And it's beautiful when it's in bloom. I usually see it, not in people's yards. I usually see it in sort of abandoned areas, which means that it grows really well where there's no water. And it's attractive to butterflies and wildlife as well. And that pretty much concludes the content of the program. I wanted to give you some resources that you can look up this information on. The UCANR website is the UCANR is who sponsors Master Gardeners, and their catalog website will give you access to all sorts of information. The next two websites, the California Institute for Water Resources and WUCALS, will give you very good information regarding water usage and planning a water-wise garden. Select Tree of Cal Poly is a great website because you can look for information based on the name of a tree, or you can even just put in the characteristics that you would like. I was looking for trees, so I put in drought tolerant, small tree, which is considered 20 feet, and flowering and evergreen, and got a list of trees that then I could choose from. And then the last two websites are websites which give you information regarding native plants. However, native plants, if you plant a new native plant, will need just as much water as any other plant that you transplant. Native plants do well in drought, but they have to already have been established. And then this is our contact information. You can contact us by email, by phone. We have a Facebook and Twitter account, as well as a website. And we have Master Gardeners who are available to answer any of your questions regarding any of your landscaping. Doesn't have to be drought tolerance, anything about your plants that you want to know. We encourage you to call us, leave us your name and contact information and your question, and someone will get back to you. And last but not least, we encourage anybody in the audience who isn't a Master Gardener to become a Master Gardener. It's a really great program, and it's free. We just ask that you volunteer afterwards to spread the word about everything that you learned. And it also is really great to teach you all the things that you have already done wrong and can now correct. But it's also a really great way to meet with other gardeners and people who share your love for plants and educating others. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. If I'm going to tear out my lawn and go to some kind of xeriscaping, you sort of make some comment there about things that were too hot. So what would be the best or recommended material that I would be replacing grass with to sort of keep the temperature down and obviously save water?
Okay, so decomposed granite is a light color. So if you wanted that, it actually comes in a couple colors. It's usually like a sandy brown or a light gray. Decomposed granite, if you like that particular look, it does look kind of desertish. That serves as a good mulch and also a weed blocker. And then you can set up, if you're planting plants and surrounding it with decomposed granite, you can then target your watering system so that it just waters the roots of each plant. And then if you did something like a mounding plant, a spreading plant, like the ground cover Manzanita, you'd be watering the plant right at the roots, but then it would spread out like 12 inches around and cover up. So it would look like a very nice shrub, but you're only watering specifically at the roots. And then the rest of the area would be covered with that. That's one thing. The other kind of mulch would be if you can get shredded, what do they call it? No, not the rubber. Shredded trees, wood. Yeah, wood. Yeah, shredded wood. If you want, shredded wood, you can usually get these at nurseries or tree facilities. Some of the recycling places have that. Again, that's a lighter color. And you want to avoid rubber because rubber's plastic. Rubber is always going to absorb heat. And again, avoid anything dark. I did have that question myself. Well, what is light colored and what can we use to, I had to remove some dark mulch myself because I didn't know any better. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
This is not directly related to drought, so maybe I'm off topic here, but can you recommend weed killers that are good to use? I mean, like, Roundup is like the go-to. We know that's not a good stuff to use, but can you make recommendations for weed killers?
I would recommend that you utilize our integrated pest management website. And that will give you much more information about weed killers because we hesitate to recommend highly chemical solutions. We do recommend hand weeding and using weed barrier cloth and mulch. All those things will help to keep your weed population down. And the integrated pest management website is IPM at UCA. Okay, UCIPM.edu.
Thank you.
Anything else? John?
No,
You took your question? Maggie, anything?
Anybody online has any questions?
Oh, does anybody online have any questions? Oh, please type any questions you have in the chat. Or you can unmute. All right. Thank you very much for your attention. And please don't hesitate to call us regarding any of your concerns. We really want to keep our trees alive and help you still have the garden that you want to have, but make sure that it's water wise.